Hello, and welcome to the webinar on IVD contract manufacturing, the hidden market within IVD. First, I'm Bruce Carlson. I'm head of Ion IVD. Please go to ionivd.com for this report, IVD contract manufacturing, and several other reports that we have in IVD that are written by IVD experts. This is all we cover. Thanks for joining the webinar. Okay, so let's first talk about that. Outsourcing is still new in vitro diagnostics. It still is, even though it's used a lot when you compare it to other industries. So, for instance, if we look at other industries and the percent of their manufacturing that's outsourced, and computers and networking, automobiles, you're getting rates of 90 to 80%. You look at the food industry, 75%. Smartphones, 35%, little less, but still pretty much there. And in medical devices, it's traditionally been lower. Even this has gone up over the years, but to 30%. And when you take highly precise medical devices, of which we must say in vitro diagnostics are, you're looking at lower rates. We estimated 15 to 20% outsourced. It's a little bit more in with COVID tests and during the COVID pandemic, but still an industry that's much more guarded, heavily regulated, so it has to be concerned with quality and willing and able to invest most manufacturing in house. It could be a variety of factories, it could be factories far from the headquarters, of course, but most of that manufacturing is under the wing of the companies, and that's simply rare in most industries. That leads to a market of, we estimate, $14 billion, growing about 4% to $16.9 billion by 2029. What are the drivers of contract manufacturing in IVD? Increasing test volumes and cost. That's number one. The growth in the population, the demand for IVD tests from all of this increased population and increased hospital stays and visits and things like that are going to lead to a demand that the manufacturing process as it is cannot remain status quo. I think everybody is seeing that, and we certainly join in that prediction. But it's not always just about volume and trying to cut costs. There's a tendency to think that contract manufacturing, that is, of course, perhaps we should define it, when a manufacturer not owned by the parent company or the branded company, or to use the very confusing term, OEM, makes the product for the branded manufacturer. That's contract manufacturing. That's not always done to cut costs. That's sometimes for a piece of expertise that the OEM may not be as aware of or ready to make. In particular, we use an example, point of care testing, microfluidics. There are companies that have been, say, traditionally analyzer companies and now forced to compete on the point of care stage or cede that revenue to someone else, which they don't want to do. They're going to increasingly turn to outsourcers, even where it's not really about costs. And then lastly, consolidation in IVD and lab customers is going to help to force this trend. We talked a bit about the sheer volume of tests. Everything's on the up. This is population. This is inpatient hospital stays. This is IVD tests. These are all in the United States and in billions. And you just simply see the growth of that as the population grows. That population, by the way, we're counting population over age 50, which really is everyone's going to drive health costs a little, but that particular segment of the population is going to drive health costs. And if you're experiencing this level of volume and this demand, it gets harder and harder to do everything in-house. We also want to look at the costs of manufacturing. Costs of manufacturing and in vitro diagnostics, again, a precision industry, highly regulated, high need for quality control, are higher simply than in other industries. Here, for example, we're taking a look at Roche from their annual reports, their stated manufacturing costs over time. And you'll notice the trend, two things. One is that, it's a pretty good chunk of revenues spent then put back into manufacturing costs. And the other thing you'll notice is that even when volume increases, right? You don't quite get away from that manufacturing cost. It's sort of following in an almost identical pattern that volume. And for any industry, in order to increase your profits, you're going to want to, you know, get some separation and start to have some more high profit from that volume. We're only using Roche. This is a one sample survey. I get it, but they are the number one IVD company, and they're fairly transparent about where their costs lie and what their costs consist of. Now, it's not all upside. There's a reason there's 4% growth, and there's a reason it's not 10%. And there was a time that it was. By the way, I used to do reports on this for my previous employer, a decade and a half ago or so, and there was a time that we were looking at 10%, or not right now. The challenges are IP issues can be a deal breaker. A high concern for IVD companies. Quality control can be a deal breaker. It's not the same as in other industries, even though those issues are present. Regulatory, logistics are all challenges. Loss of identity. Okay, what do we mean by that? Well, manufacturing in some ways is part of the IVD company's identity, related again to the quality of that product, the ability of an in vitro diagnostics maker to say, we made this test to their laboratory customers and stand behind it is still pretty strong in this industry, whereas in other industries, they're willing to cede a bit of that. And lastly, one always has to be careful because contract manufacturers are IVD companies in many cases. We see that major IVDs have branded contract manufacturing. You see Thermo in this market, for instance, Biotechne, but many of these companies also have tests. So a contract manufacturer is going to, at some point, also provide IVD tests. So are you helping a competitor? Is always a question in IVD. It's not an insurmountable question. IVD companies, by the way, work with each other all the time and they distribute each other and things. It's just another factor that keeps this market a little bit lower than in other industries. But it's a hidden 14 to 16 billion dollar industry that exists within that IVD market. It grows as IVD grows, and the growth areas tend to be the same as IVD. So as hematology and say POC, coagulation get hot. Contract manufacturing for that will get hot. As genetics and genomics get hot, reagents for that will get hot. As there's more of a need for finished point of care products. That's not surprisingly a high growth area of contract manufacturing. So maybe little surprise there. Let's compare contract manufacturing to the IVD market. And if you look at that trend, you'll see that it really is comparable growth with a slight edge to the contract manufacturing. Okay, so while IVD we project, at least right now, growth of 2 to 3%. Got to remember we're still losing some revenue from the from COVID testing that will be somewhat reduced, and in other areas, 2 to 3% growth. You're seeing challenging times in various sectors, say Asian Pacific markets. That's limiting overall IVD growth, where contract manufacturing growth is going to be about 4 to 5%. I would project that if let's say our estimate on IVD growth is off a bit, let's say it's more in the 4 range, you could pretty much move that contract manufacturing growth up a bit. That's the relationship between the two that we see. We talked about IP issues. All right, intellectual property issues, a big concern in contract manufacturing. And that consists of data sharing risks, regulatory complexities. Will the contract manufacturer get it right? Personal turnover. We liked working with this person, but they're not there anymore. Trust and reputation. All right, are we losing our trust? Do we trust this contract manufacturer? All of those things. There are ways around it, though, and companies are navigating these as we speak, auditing CMO facilities, leveraging blockchain, need to know policies. So you don't have to give all the information to that contract manufacturer, just who needs to know. And the OEM needs to keep monitoring for that any unauthorized use and stay involved in the process. Clear contracts, clearly written. And in some cases, if you're worried about personal turnover at the contract manufacturing company, getting incentives in that contract so that they retain skilled personnel. Here are some of the contract manufacturing, some of the larger ones that specialize in IVD products, but there are scores, probably hundreds of companies that will do at least a part of the process for IVD. And if you're noticing that you see some larger companies in there, Werfen, for instance, Millipore Sigma, Biotechne, yeah, that's a feature, not a bug. It is a growth area for some IVD companies. Like Nova Biomedical will make great diabetes testing systems. Very large IVD companies, somewhat off the radar at times, but they also have an outsourcing branch of their company. It's a scattered market. I would say high amount of companies. There is, however, tighter competition and more distinction within certain specialties of the market, say like point of care manufacturing, where, by the way, we're seeing faster growth than contract manufacturing for lab-based systems. And that shouldn't be entirely surprising. Um, Companies are more willing to invest in it. It requires more precise technology and knowledge, and it's simply an area where companies have to be more involved in than they were previously in order to compete for an IVD demand out there that increasingly is looking for results at the point of care. Well, somebody's got to produce that. One mistake to make is to think of contract manufacturing as outsourcing, as offshoring. It is not necessarily so. However, it is the case that there are markets abroad for IVD contract manufacturing. China, India, parts of the Asia Pacific, Eastern Europe. These are fast growing geographies. But this is a market that exists in the United States. And you hear a lot of discussion about manufacturing in the United States, particularly around the last presidential election and even before in President Trump's term. A lot of talk about manufacturing or keeping U.S. manufacturing jobs. Contract manufacturing for medical devices broadly and IVD specifically still retains a large United States component. It's advantageous to have a player near headquarters, so either US or Europe, in order to increase that trust, that bond, that quality control, be able to respond to things quickly, for instance. Our report breaks out the IVD contract manufacturing by company, by country, I should say. Sorry about that. We also have breakouts of specific types of tests in our report, test categories. So, for instance, we'll break out immunoassays and the IVD contract manufacturing for them, but we'll also break out how much of that is antibodies, how much is antigens, how much is complete instrument systems, start to finish, and how much is components. We'll list companies in our report if you're looking for partners to source to. And we also have key points and analysis. This is what makes us different, I believe, from other reports. We're actually going to talk about our findings and what it means for you. With that, I'll conclude the webinar again. This was a quick one, just talking about that hidden market in IVD that most people may not be aware of, but is an opportunity for many. And we've got a report on it. IonIVD.com. Our reports are either at market or less in terms of price than other things you see on the internet. And I'll just advise that everything we do is written by people that are in this IVD market and look at this IVD market all day. They don't do a report on automobiles one day and then IVD the next. We're specialists in the IVD market and we take some pride in that. So I encourage you, if you're interested more, if you're doing business planning in this area, if you're thinking about a merger or an acquisition related to IVD contract manufacturing, if you're thinking about opening up an IVD contract manufacturing market, or if you're considering looking for IVD contract manufacturer, all of those reasons, you might want to seek out a business planning resource tool like this. We've done the work for you. Thanks for taking the time to attend our webinar, and I hope that you'll attend other Ion IVD webinars soon. Bye for now.